Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sukhendu Das, speaking on behalf of Center for Research in Post-Humanities. I'll be moderating this session, and our speaker is Nikita Prokhorov. Nikita is a philosophy PhD student at the University of California, Irvine. She is working as an epistemologist of multi/interspecies interaction and heteronormative and gender epistemic injustices. Operating within the field of critical plant studies, Nikita's primary projects center on de anthropocentricizing concepts of intelligence and agency with respect to vegetal beings, utilizing novel readings of Wittgensteinian philosophy of language and epistemology. Nikita, I welcome you, and the virtual platform is all yours now.
Develops this idea of, he considers this idea of hinges, which are these commitments which are irrational. They are basic to our understanding of the world, but not tied up to our cognition. They are represented in our actions and are must be enacted. And they are constituted by the world, that is, our environment and how we act in it and how it impacts us. So that's a lot of information about these commitments. I also want to make clear that these commitments are not clearly evident to us. So they are generally things that we hold, such as there is an external world, something that usually we don't doubt. And if we do doubt or state explicitly, appear like nonsense in most conversations or language games that we play. So Wittgenstein specifically describes their irrationality as being beyond justified or unjustified, something that is, as it were, animal. And this is significant because it really reflects how deeply these hinge commitments impact our interaction with the world and with others. And in that sense, they are, deeply connected. And he says that is to say, quote, the questions that we raise and our doubts depend on the fact that some propositions are exempt from doubt, are, as it were, like hinges on which those turn. That is to say, it belongs to the logic of our scientific investigations that certain things are indeed not doubted. And in that sense, hinges make it the fact that they are beyond doubt is significant in the sense that they play this foundational role. And if we were to doubt them, something as certain and important to our language and our logic and understanding and ability to interact with the world, such as there's an external world, such as the skeptics and the various philosophical traditions do. Wittgenstein says that we can't actually doubt these things. To actually doubt it would be to be nonsensical or to reflect some sort of epistemological break that shouldn't be happening otherwise. And it's significant that hinges are reflected in our actions. He says that justifying the evidence in respect to coming up with epistemic defenses against skeptics comes to an end. But the end is not certain propositions striking us immediately as true. That is, it is not kind of seeing on our part, it is our acting which lies at the bottom of our language game. Meaning that when we want to understand language and, in that sense, understand meaning, creation, and human understanding of the world, we need to look at action before we look at language itself, because the fundamental commitments that impact our language are enacted and not actually explicitly made clear in our language. And it's also significant that he highlights the fact that these deep hinge commitments are things that are reflected in our environment and our environment specific. Specifically, he gives examples of education and pedagogy and learning in the world. He says children do not learn that books exist, that armchairs exist, et cetera, et cetera. They learn to fetch books, sit in armchairs, et cetera, et cetera. Meaning to say, as an example, if a child were to eventually at some point, maybe as an adult, say something such as, armchairs don't exist. People that are familiar with armchairs generally, that grew up around them, would be confused by this, view it as nonsense, or try and understand if the person is trying to play some sort of other language game. Maybe they're trying to be silly or make a joke. Wittgenstein says in another passage in Uncertainty, I did not get my picture of the world by satisfying myself with its correctedness, nor do I have it because I'm satisfied of it. Did I get my picture of the world by satisfying myself with its correctness, nor do I have it because I'm satisfied with its correctness. No, it is the inherited background against which I distinguish between true and false. And in that sense, it's important to note that the distinctions, these hinge commitments, are both impacted by the environment and impact our ability to understand it. So that's a very quick overview of hinge epistemology. The idea that there are these commitments very foundational to our language and to our ability to understand and interact with the world, which are beyond doubt, which are irrational, which we don't come to through reasoning or language, but are brought about through learning and through being in the world. And most of the commitments that Wittgenstein articulates are epistemic ones, such as there is an external world, or my name is blank, things that generally we would be certain of. However, I believe that by articulating and bringing Wittgenstein into dialogue with Octavia Butler, we're able to gain a fuller and more rich view of the possibilities of hinge epistemology and of Wittgenstein's philosophy of language as it relates to post-humanities research and environmental humanities, and specifically considering multi-species epistemologies and the ability to create non-hierarchical epistemologies. So what specifically makes Octavia Butler's Dawn such an appealing point of analysis, and what makes her such a strong interlocutor for Wittgenstein? Dawn, to provide a very brief introduction to the book, is about a woman named Lilith who is abducted by an alien species named the Oankali, who participate in a practice of gene trading where they exchange genetics with other species across planets. And the Oankali live in a ship that is a living organism, and what we would consider, what most people would consider technology, which they use, is also living. And in that sense, they are living in an incredibly interactive and interwoven multi-species community that is heavily dependent upon each other. And as Lilith is abducted, she is eventually selected to become a participant or a sort of mentor for other humans so that they can repopulate Earth after a nuclear war has occurred. And Lilith is eventually genetically modified, and certain genes are taken from Lilith in a gene trade, and eventually she becomes more than human in some sense, and she questions her identity at various points in the book. So what makes the Oankali and Lilith such rich points of analysis? So first of all, in their interactions and between the humans, Oankali, there is a strong sense of the importance of perception and embodied learning. And early on in the book, when the Oankali reveal themselves to her, she is initially disgusted because they are not human-like in appearance. They don't have any perceivable facial features. They have strange tentacles on their upper body, on what would generally be called a head or a face. And generally speaking, they look very alien in appearance, although somewhat human and bipedal. One of the Oankali tells her, when you can, he said, come closer and look at me. I've had humans believe they saw human sensory organs on my head and then get angry with me when they realized they were wrong. highlighting the fact that humans as a species have a difficult time with difference, and specifically with the difficult time attributing to intelligence to non-human species, even if they are humanoid in appearance, bipedal. Specifically, moving on to actually describe and talk about the Oankali themselves and their rich sense of perception and engagement with the world, it's written in Dawn. They have special organs for their observation, a specific gender group of the Oankali. My relative examined you, observed a few of your normal selves, compared them with what you had learned from other humans most like you, and said you had not only a cancer, but a talent for cancer, which of course shocked Lilith and disturbed her, this idea that she could have a talent for cancer. But the Oankali's embodied perception viewed something like cancer as a potential for growth rather than as a damage and possible harm to a body. And this allowed them to participate in a kind of trade and healing process, which took her cancer out and prevented it from being harmful for her, but in some sense allowed them to develop the ability to regrow organs. And in this perceptive kind of embodied knowledge, there's a certain sense of multi-species trading and interaction, which is rich and beneficial. And it's written not more than, when asked specifically in terms of what Lilith could offer them, they say, not more than you can give, but more than you can understand here now, more than words will be able to help you understand at first. There are things you must see and hear outside. So the things that she needs to fundamentally change in order to shift her perception and perspective must be felt before they can be understood through explicit words with meaning. And at a later point in the book, there's moments of embodied teaching and embodied learning. And the Oankali, as I previously mentioned, have an incredibly rich multi-species form of life and knowledge. There's various points as Lilith is learning the Oankali language. She is trying and struggling and receiving lessons. And after a time, one of the quotes in the text is, after a time, it said, "Come back in, I'll teach you more of our history." It knew she liked stories of the long multi-species Oankali history, and the stories helped her Oankali vocabulary, meaning that this form of life, in a very Wittgensteinian sense, the actions and the history and interactions of the multi-species life of the Oankali shapes their language. And by learning this history, by becoming more attuned to the Oankali way of life, Lilith is better able to actually understand the language itself, which is in itself a very Wittgensteinian concept. At an earlier point in the book, when describing the ship that they were living in, an Oankali was recounting to Lilith that a human doctor used to say it loved us, the ship itself. There is an affinity, but it's biological, a strong symbiotic relationship. We serve the ship's needs and it serves ours. It would die without us, and we would be planet bound without it. For us, that would eventually mean death. And in that sense, the ship itself, a living organism, and the Oankali on board recognize each other's needs and have a deeply symbiotic form of life. And the ship is full of other living organisms, some sort of movement organism which transports the Oankali and Lilith across the ship using a thin film of what Lilith tries to describe as slime. And in that sense, the Oankali form of life necessitates the strong sense of interspecies connectivity. But that's something that Lilith initially struggles with, because we as humans don't have that perception. We don't have, at the moment, these multi-species hinge commitments, these commitments to the world, these beliefs of interaction and compassion that the Oankali seem to have. So she struggles with this, and in a lot of ways, she has a hard time understanding her relationship to the Oankali. And she begins to try and understand, and puts herself into positions of epistemic certainty and uncertainty relative to animals, and compares herself to animals at various points. Talks about being in a cage, and compares herself to zoo animals at various points. The significance being that fundamental to what Dawn is showing and to what Butler was possibly trying to show. But what we can clearly see is that there are epistemic and inherent linguistic commitments about multi-species life, which need to be confronted in order to develop the kind of richness that the Oankali seem to show and provide to Lilith. And the human problem of this kind of epistemic commitment, perhaps, is identified by one of the Oankali, specifically saying, you are hierarchical. That's the older and more entrenched characteristic of that, and intelligence. Those were the two characteristics that led to humans' kind of fatal flaw of nuclear war. We saw it in your closest animal relatives and in your most distant ones. It's a terrestrial characteristic. When human intelligence served it instead of guiding it, when human intelligence did not even acknowledge it as a problem but took pride in it or did not notice it at all, the rattling sounded again. That was like ignoring cancer. I think your people did not realize what a dangerous thing they were doing. So in this sense, we can see, first of all, the connections between Wittgenstein's hinge epistemology, or rather the hinge epistemologies developed from Wittgenstein's notes, and Octavia Butler's Dawn, and the way that it presents various epistemologies. Specifically, we can see that she presents epistemology and meaning building and the development of language and hinge commitments in a way that very strongly resembles Wittgenstein's own way of describing the development of these kinds of perceptions and commitments, one which is very embodied, one which is seemingly irrational and not based on understanding, but one which is crucial to language itself on a fundamental level and shapes logic and perception going forward and our ability to interact with the world. As Lilith becomes more understanding of the Oankali way of life, and as she becomes more Oankali herself, with increased gene trading, she is capable of moving around the ship, accessing different parts of it, meaning that she is interacting with another multi-species being in a way that is embodied and deeply felt, but must be developed not through linguistic meaning building and reasoning, but rather an subconscious and enacted way of life. And specifically, this hinge commitment of hierarchy, or a commitment to the idea of hierarchized, or rather a sort of a hinge commitment of anthropocentric knowledge, that there is a hierarchy to knowledge and there's a hierarchy to multi-species knowledge building, is clearly identified within Dawn. This idea that the humans that are most resistant to multi-species interaction are the ones that end up suffering the most and lack the ability to develop certain epistemological perspectives that other humans in the book, including Lilith, do. And in that sense, by developing these connections between Wittgenstein and Octavia Butler and her text Dawn, I believe there's a rich source of critique and epistemological positioning and forward-looking, specifically in confronting anthropocentric hinge commitments of hierarchy. And because it's important to note that while hinge commitments, and I'll just go back to a previous slide, are irrational and beyond doubt, they are also described by Wittgenstein as things that are capable of change through enacted ways of being, through ways of responding to the world and being with the world that are different. Because he identifies hinge commitments, things that would appear insane at the time, shortly before his passing in the 1950s. For example, that there might be a group of people that believe that there are people on the moon. Well, if Wittgenstein was alive after the moon landings, then he could have, such a commitment would have changed. It would not have been identified by him as something so deeply fundamental, because at the time, for him, something such as someone going on the moon would have been perceived as, senseless or nonsensical. So with that in mind, through an enacted way of being, through an enacted development of epistemologies and meaning making, specifically as it pertains to other multi-species beings and multi-species collectives, we're able to develop a richer and more vibrant epistemology while also confronting and eventually eroding these anthropocentric hinge commitments based on kind of hierarchy and the idea that there are certain kinds of knowledge hierarchies. But that is my presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm deeply grateful for the ability and opportunity to present.
Yes, thank you, Nikita, for his interesting talk. And now I open this session to question, answer, and observation. Do you have any question? Okay. Yes, Nikita, thank you very much for presenting this paper. And do you have any plan to visit India in near future?
I would love to. I got excited about the conference, but it was so soon that I wasn't able to.
Yes. So the thing is that our center is going to organize another conference, maybe in the middle of July and August, and it will be notified much earlier. So you will get much time, and you will have a standing invitation whenever you will come to India. Just inform me. We will be happy to host you in person in our center. And we would also like to get in touch with you because your contribution matters most to, to develop our center. Thank you, Nikita. And one more thing. Yes, yes. One more thing. We are working for publication. Actually, we have got so far 90 papers, right? We have to mercilessly select. I will send you another call for paper, right? And I need another 1 or 2 months to assess what kind of volume I can publish or work on, because the range of the papers are so diverse. So I have to narrow down my focus. So therefore, I need some time. Definitely, I would like to get in touch with you. Thank you, Nikita.
So thank you so much.
Yes, yes, welcome.